We're going to do a call and response to open the Dharma talk. The Dharma is vast and subtle.
The Dharma is vast and subtle.
We now have a chance to see this.
We now have a chance to see this.
Study this and practice this.
Study this and practice this.
May we realize this true meaning.
May we realize this true meaning.
Thank you all for being here this morning. I see so many faces that I haven't met before, and I'm just glad to see all of you. And most of you maybe don't know anything at all about me, so just a brief introduction. My name is Eric Daishin, and I came from Ames. I'm acting as the interim priest here during this time of transition of leadership, and also transition of the Zen Center, transition of the former abbot. So a lot of changes taking place right now, and so we hold this change together. I thought I would share a little bit about also who my teacher is, and then give you opportunity just to ask questions. So I'm happy to field any questions. There's so many questions that are potential here when we're practicing Zen, sitting in silence, and we often wonder, like, what am I supposed to be doing? You ever think that? We create this space. The Zen Center is a space to explore our own minds and how it works. My teacher would say that our practice is like walking into an open gym with no lines on the floor, no nets or baskets. You don't know what game you're playing, and we kind of have to figure it out as we go. So there are lines, and there is a game plan, but it might not be completely obvious. Many of us have, prior to coming to a Zen center, most likely have encountered Buddhism in some form. But in the 1940s in the United States, maybe not. And so this is a little bit of story about my own teacher. When she was born in 1939, and you wonder, like in those days, how people came to Buddhism. And I want to share these stories just as a way to stimulate thinking about yourselves. Like, how did you come to Buddhism? What attracted you to the Dharma? Because this is, we call Hotsubo Daishin, the mind that seeks the way, the mind that seeks healing, the mind that seeks enlightenment. We desire, all of us as humans, we desire to end suffering in some way. How do we end our suffering is the question that we bring to this life. And there's multiple possibilities there. It's not like there's one right way. And of course, Buddhism has also several paths within it. The Eightfold Path is one of them. The Eightfold Path to healing, to joy, to equanimity. And Zen, we offer a lot of tools. Zen offers a lot of tools for figuring out, how does this mind work? How do we use it in such a way that I get out of my own way? How do we get out of our own way? Our ego is constantly getting in our way. And our work when we're sitting in meditation is to is to begin to notice our egos and maybe allow the ego to take a backseat for a little bit. Let yourself be, it's called babysat. Let yourself be babysat by zazen. We want to employ some kind of method. What do I do? What should I do when I sit on the cushion? We want to employ some method, and sometimes we can have success with that. But our root practice is to allow ourselves to be babysat by zazen. We let ourselves be taken care of. Zazen takes care of us. We don't practice zazen. We let zazen take care of us. But again, that practice may not be for everyone. So we don't want to stop there either. In any case, my teacher was born in 1939, and in those days, access to the Dharma was impossible unless you lived in an Asian country or were brought up Asian American in this country. And in her case, she grew up in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Has anybody been to Pennsylvania? Okay. Lewisburg is kind of central Pennsylvania in a fairly rural area. Pennsylvania is known for, Lewisburg is known for two things. The university, Bucknell University, that's where I attended school, and that's where I met my teacher. And the other thing it's known for is the penitentiary, the federal penitentiary. And it's surrounded by, very similar to where I live now in Ames, Iowa, cornfields and soy fields. And my teacher was a local of Lewisburg. As a little girl, she was well connected to the university. And her parents, they were getting ready to move into a new home in the town. And the people that had owned the house and were preparing to move out were Christian missionaries to China. And as a little girl, she saw these boxes filled with letters that had what looked like squiggles written down the pages, and there were no ABCs on the pages, but just these little lines, squiggles. That was her introduction to Chinese. I didn't know people could write that. And she was lucky to have an uncle. As she grew up, she had an uncle who was a geography teacher. He took out a map for her and said, look at this map. Look at this map of the world. You see how large the United States is. And now look over here on the east side of the map. Look how large Asia is. It's pretty different, isn't it? The United States is fairly small when you compare it to China, Japan, Korea, all of the Asian countries there. Let's take a look at your history textbook. How many pages are dedicated to Asia? Of course, there was 1941, maybe a handful of pages compared to the Western world, Europe, United States. Does that seem right to you? The teacher said, no, it doesn't seem right. Go to the library at Bucknell and start to study, to take out books on Asian history, Asian culture. So that's she, as a local, she had free access to the university library. So she started to do that. As she grew older, around at the age of 13, I'll tell you her name. Her name's Patricia. She wrote Patricia, and her Dharma name is Daishin. And when I first,
Which means great what?
Great Circle.
Great circle.
Yeah.
Like and so, okay.
Yeah, like an so. When I first met her, she said, "My name's Diane, like dying to meet you."
Yeah.
So at the age of 13, she loved watching ballet. She wanted to be a ballet dancer. And they didn't have a lot of money. And her parents wanted to discourage her from being a ballet dancer because she would have to go to the neighboring towns to take ballet lessons. And they didn't think it would be a good idea for someone like her to be a dancer. So they told the minister in their local church that maybe can you discourage our daughter from wanting to dance? And how many of you have seen the movie Footloose? I just saw a play of that. My wife and I went to see it last week. It was in Waterloo, as a matter of fact. And I couldn't believe, I started making the connection between what was going on in that play and that motion picture movie and the reality in this country up until, in some cases, early 1980s, where dancing was thought of as from the devil, evil. That kind of thought was present. And it's hard for me to imagine that now, because I like to dance, but I'm very shy when it comes to moving my body in that way. But I couldn't imagine like people actually banning it in towns. And so when, I hadn't seen that movie for at least 2 or 3 decades. And then to see the play, I got a whole other side of it. So my teacher went to, as a girl, 13-year-old girl, she went to the church that Sunday, and the minister ended his sermon by saying, and anybody who dances will go to heaven. So she said to herself at that time, I don't want to be some kind of hoochie coochie dancer. I want to be a ballet dancer. I want to be a ballerina. This has some integrity to it. And she stopped going to the church from that point forward.
Was that a Baptist church or a Catholic church?
It was a Presbyterian.
Presbyterian.
Yeah.
Wow.
She stopped going, and her parents were okay with that. They allowed it, at least. I think they probably wanted her to attend, but she chose not to. And this is the 1940s, where you don't necessarily say no to your parents. So, and they said, okay, well, if you want to dance, then you'll have to pay for it yourself. And so she paid for it by doing homework for other students in her class. But she went regularly to start to dance. When she went to college, then she chose a university where she could major in ballet, classical ballet. She went to Texas Christian University here in the Midwest. And her father said, okay, if you're gonna major in ballet, at least minor in something that you can eat off of. And so she decided to minor in French language. But it came in handy because at the end of her 3rd year of college, she went to register for her 4th year, and they said to her, you can't register for your 4th year until your 3rd year was paid for. Your parents haven't paid for your education this past year. So she learned that through that way, she learned that they had gone bankrupt. So she had already made a commitment to another schoolmate to be in an apartment with her for the year, but she needed a job now. So she went hunting for a job, and she found one at the Texas oil refinery company, Mighty Plate. She found a job when she told them she was minoring. First, she spoke with the secretary there, and she said, we don't have any openings, but let me take you out to lunch. And so she did, and we had a nice conversation. And during that conversation, she mentioned her minor in French. She said, The secretary said, wait a minute, I have a job for you. We need somebody who can type letters in French to our French company in Quebec, our French-speaking company in Quebec. So she got this job writing letters in French to the Quebec company. She would say, encouraging the salesmen to sell my late Texas oil roof tar. That was her job for that year. And after the year was over, she moved to New York City, worked as a temp, and continued to do classical ballet dancing. So her heart was set on dancing. But she, of course, had to have some kind of income. And so she worked as a temp. During that temp work, she met her husband-to-be. He happened to be an extraordinarily wealthy businessman. And she didn't really, he had asked her out a couple of times, but she really wasn't interested in him until he offered her tickets to the ballet. So she went, of course. She wasn't going to refuse tickets to the ballet. And shortly after, I guess maybe seeing each other for some time, I'm not sure how long, but it probably wasn't that long. He asked her to marry him. And she was fairly reluctant. But her family encouraged her to do so because they were not in a good financial situation to support her at all. And here he was, very wealthy and could easily support her financially. And so she did. She got married to him. And as a result of their marriage and his work, they moved around the world for the first several years of their marriage, including at least a year in Japan. And this is in the 1950s. Right? So still not real lot of access to Dharma, although when she was at Texas Christian University, she picked up a book by D.T. Suzuki. You guys have heard of D.T. Suzuki? He's one of the early pioneers of Zen in the United States. Of course, not the only one, but one of the more popular ones amongst Westerners. She said when she read that book, she said, I couldn't understand a thing he was saying on one level, but somehow it resonated with me. Couldn't understand it, but it somehow made sense. It didn't make sense in this area of the body, but something hit her here. So in Japan, she continued to dance. She got her husband didn't want her to spend. She had a certain amount of money that she could spend. If she wanted to spend more than that, she had to get a job, and so she did. She got a job teaching English and made some nice connections there. They continued to move around a bit, and she became really dissatisfied with the relationship after a number of years. They weren't having kids at that point. They decided to wait, and she has asthma, serious asthma, and she would find herself hosting parties for very wealthy businessmen who smoked cigars, and it was terrible for her lungs, and she just wasn't satisfied in the relationship. And I remember when I first met her at Bucknell, we sat down and did zazen, and she shared something that really turned my mind 180 degrees. She said, you can have a lot of money and not be happy. You can have next to nothing and be very happy. And she lived it. She lived that. She decided that she would leave the marriage, but her husband would not grant her a divorce. I guess in those years, you had to get permission from your husband if you wanted a divorce, and he would not give that to her. So she decided to leave. She bought a ticket, and one day when he wasn't there, she left to call her belongings.
Was she in the US at that time, or was she?
She was in New Jersey,
New Jersey.
in Princeton, and she decided to get a ticket to Japan because she knew he wouldn't be able to find her there. So she found some work teaching English. She was a very resourceful person, you can see. She found out what she could do. She said she had three choices in her relationship with her husband. You know, she has a fairly, my understanding, last I spoke with her, which was yesterday, or 2 days ago, she has a very good relationship with her former husband today. Yeah. But in those days, it was quite challenging. This is in her mid-20s, late 20s that I'm speaking of. She said, I had three choices: escape, insanity, or suicide. She said, I chose the easiest, I don't know if she said the easiest path of what, but you know, she was having thoughts of committing suicide. She was driving on the opposite side of the country roads, right? Not knowing if another car would come. You know, when I reflect on how many of us have lost people to suicide. Way too many people. So she chose escape. She was getting medicine from a psychiatrist. I don't feel right on this. It makes me feel strange. Numb to the world. Here, but I'm not here. Can't do that. I'm gonna go crazy. I'm gonna get out. So she went to live in Japan. She got work as an English teacher. I can tell you so many stories. There's a connection, though, directly with this particular temple. So after several years of living in Japan, she was living in a small Tokyo apartment. And one Easter, she decided to turn on the radio and listen to a service taking place. I believe it was in Japan somewhere. And she thought, okay. And this was during the height of the Vietnam War. She was listening. She was listening to the service, and there was a moment of silence during the service. And she heard a voice all of a sudden at the church. She's listening to it on the radio. She heard this voice come out of it. Now, keep in mind, during this time, she was away from all of what was happening in the United States around the Vietnam War. Now, I wasn't alive at that time, but maybe some of you were and can remember protests and things like that. What was that?
I said, just laughing, you weren't alive.
I was not alive. That was before my time. It was definitely before my time. And I was born in 1973, just to set the record straight. So she had been absent from all of the protests. She kind of was a little bit, it was a little bit before her time, and she was kind of on the fence about it. Is this war in Vietnam a good thing, like she's been hearing from some sources, or is it not a good thing, like she'd been hearing from other sources? So here she was listening to this church service on the radio, and all of a sudden silence, and she hears this voice booming, "Stop the war! Stop the murder! Stop the killing!" Who was it? Who was that guy? She was no longer on the fence about the war. Who was that guy? Somebody who was instrumental in this space here. A man named Isaac Victoria. He wrote a book called Zen at War. Has anybody heard of this book? So she wanted to meet him. I'm going to meet this person. He was not too far from her. And he introduced her to Zen practice and suggested that she practice with a teacher named Robe Sogen Roshi, who happened to be not too far from where her Tokyo apartment was. So his temple was a Rinzai temple. It's a little bit different from Soto. So she started to go there every day, every morning, without question. There's more stories around that, like why did she go to this? Maybe I'll save those for another time. But I will say that at the Rinzai temple, the air, she said, was so crisp that you couldn't cut it with a knife when you were sitting in zazen. And Omori Roshi would say, you need to listen so deeply that you can hear the ash from the incense drop. So this is a good challenge for us. And she said the first 6 months that she was sitting with him, her mantra was 99 bottles of beer on the wall. 99 bottles of beer. Would someone ring the ding dang bell and get me out of here? They had to sit in some form of a lotus posture in the temples in Japan, and her knees wouldn't go down. So she had to sit with her legs up. She was very uncomfortable, all kinds of pain that she experienced. But she said, if the pain in my knees was greater than the pain in my heart, I wouldn't have stuck it out. It's only because the pain in the heart was greater than the pain in my knees that I kept at this practice. So it gave her an opportunity to what she called burning up her crud, all of the garbage of her life, her mental crud. That's what this practice is. We come here to burn up our bad karma, clear it out, and then we go back to the world. Maybe we can see things a little clearer. How can I see straight? How can I get to be real? How can I live a life of no lie? Those were her 3 questions. How can I see straight? How can I get to be real? How can I live a life of no lie? I wanted to share about the 3 Dharma doorways. So she said there's 3 Dharma, and I'll close with this and then open up for questions. 3 Dharma doorways to practice. One is impermanence. The second one is repentance. And the third one is self-improvement. The first one, impermanence, I think we're all familiar with that, at least on an intellectual level. right? We understand things change. And the Dharma helps us to deal with that on an emotional, physical level, those changes. The second one, repentance. We do something that we regret. And, we want to change the way we do things. That's the second doorway that we can enter through. And those two doorways are pretty solid doorways, change and repentance. We get a lot of resources within Buddhism to deal with those things. So the third door is kind of one of those revolving doors, self-improvement. It lets you in to the Buddha's palace, and you get the nice cool air conditioning. It's comfortable weather from the outside. But if you don't have another reason for being there, it'll just continue to revolve you back out the door. So we have to be careful with the self-improvement doorway, I should say. So those are the three doors. So, permanence, repentance, and self-improvement. So, welcome. Any questions?
Hi. In the very beginning, thank you. That was a lovely story about your teaching. In the very beginning, you were talking about Ecstatic Practice and how often our ego will get in the way. And we happened to have, like just a couple of weeks ago, a pretty lively discussion after World Peace Ceremony, because I feel like people kind of like intuitively know what they would feel like ego is, but like if you just pause, like what exactly though is it? Like, is it conditioning? Is it misperception? Is it like, or is it even possible to kind of boil it down to any kind of like pat response? Like, what exactly is ego?
Good question.
And we all have a lot of different answers too, like, you know.
Yeah, where's the
I don't know. What was your storage?
I was trying to remember. The thing that I remember coming here is that before I started Zen practice, ego was one little tiny thing. Just whatever is directly involving my happiness, that's all I really care about. And then it kind of expanded a little bit to my son, expanded a little bit to other people. Otherwise, it was a carefully guarded little portion of that. But as I came here, and especially with working with Nolan, we scared the shit out of me all the time. But I eventually kind of worked through that fear, and I started to treat this place as my own. This was second home to me. I didn't treat it as my own property, but I took care of it as if it was my own, but I was doing it for others.
Yeah.
So ego expanded from my own little place to this place, to even more place. The world's a huge place. Why stop there? Just keep going. So my definition of ego was, yeah, mine, gimme, but not mine, gimme just for myself, mine, gimme for others.
So do you feel like then your ego is basically like a small sense of self as opposed to is a larger sense of self?
Yeah, it's the thing with Zen practice. Ego is always, in my opinion, bad. Get rid of it. It gets in the way. Ego is a sense of suffering. That's the reason why we suffer, is because we have this sense of suffering self. But a lot of Zen teachers have big egos. So how do you reconcile that? So it's like it seems like whatever you take care of, that's sort of like ego. So it's more of an expansive sort of take care of.
That sounds like you're saying that the ego is expanding, that your ego is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, not egotistical, but a sense of.
Oh, a sense of what is self,
A sense of self.
oh, okay, I see.
So there's not a sense of me other, there's a sense of bigger me. Yeah, bigger me that includes. Right.
Okay.
My me includes everybody in this room.
Got
My me includes, hopefully, people in this neighborhood. My me includes people in this town. My me includes people who I think don't give a shit about me. Tough. My ego hopefully includes people who want to kill me. Ooh, that's even tougher. That's really pushing the bounds out there.
So then when I think of ego, people often, and that's the other thing we were talking about, people often talk about it as like a negative
Right,
thing.
right.
But that was also, I remember something that came up in the discussions, that this is also something, there can be like a sense of a healthy ego, and what does that look like? And I think maybe what you're talking about there is like
It's a change of definition
of
ego.
self and,
The self, yeah.
and.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I see with Zen teachers.
Yeah.
They're, there are a lot of Zen teachers I've been in front of who are big forceful powers out there.
Yeah.
Yet they seem to be doing it for others.
Yeah.
It still doesn't define what the ego is.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
See, I think of ego as almost,
It's okay, I'm just waiting for everyone.
as something
I'm new.
closely tied to the three poisons, which is, greed, anger, and delusion. So ego is, to me, is associated with clinging, with aversion. Those feelings that come up because you have this delusion of a separate self.
So in
I
my
forgot
work,
your name.
Holly.
Holly.
So in my work, we talk about this a lot with my clients.
What do you do?
Well, it's a bit complicated, but basically I'm an astrologer, but I
Okay.
have a lot of clients where I like coach. I have a psychology, philosophy background, education and whatnot. And I use a lot of, my main thing for Zen is non-attachment and unconditional love. That's what I strive to, that's my practice with everything that comes to me in life, is where can I drive unconditional love, learn unconditional love, learn non-attachment from these situations. But in Freud, Freud and Jung argued a lot about the hidden ego, what it was. But in my work, I find that it is a protection that we use. And in some cases, it's like not about protection. I use an example with clients. If you go to your mother-in-law's for dinner every Sunday and you cannot stand your sister-in-law because for whatever reason drives you crazy, but for the sake of your husband and your children and your mother-in-law, you're going to keep your mouth shut. And so the ego has to come in and take over to be able to fake its way through that whole thing, right? Or the ego could come out in a negative way and just like barrel through the sister-in-law every single time and make everybody else's life even more miserable through that, right? Or it can take it aside and take that aside. So, but I find the ego is more for self-protection. So whether it's whether it's making it more difficult in your life or making it more comfortable, either way, you got to sort of define what that is. And eventually, something that you may go to the mother-in-law's every Sunday, you might transcend past that, and therefore your sister-in-law will no longer bother you. But you use the ego to learn how to do that, because eventually you become comfortable with the ego, having to fake your way through dinner every single time, right? So either you can humanize it and eventually find courage, as one might say, to confront her at the dinner table, or you transcend it, which I hope to do most of the time using the Zen practice, and I use that ego to find out what is it triggering in me, what is it, why is this affecting me, why is this bothering me, what do I need to take a look at, and hopefully
That's hard to do.
it's very hard to do, right? Especially if you're there every Sunday. But I mean, if it's only once in a while, you can kind of get over it, right? You just need somebody in the parking lot and the guy's a jerk, takes your parking spot. That's just a one-off thing.
Yeah.
But when it's on a regular basis, the ego takes over. So I think in most cases, if we can not have it at all, eventually, but I think it's part of that psychological, as Freud would say it's something that happened in your childhood, and Jung would say it's more of a spiritual, psychological. So I think it's separate from our spirit sometimes. It's a human construct that's separate from spirit.
What's your view of?
Oh, I don't know. I want to hear. I can respond, of course, but I've been talking a lot. I want to see. Just want to check if anybody else want to share.
Well, yeah, and so it seems like there's like this through line from what I hear everyone else saying is that it has to do with the illusion of separateness and how we take that perception, but it's honestly, I mean, let's not lie, it is our experience. I mean, it is a misperception, but it is also the core of the human experience, that we're all having our own little life events over here, and I'm going to react differently to something than you are, and you are, and you are. But I guess it's how, I wonder if maybe a Zen practice, of like a really robust Zen practice, is how much of our non-separateness can we integrate into our separate experiences. And again, I'm always thinking, what does that look like? Like, what does that look like? What does it feel like? Like, what does it look like in a moment to moment, situation to situation basis? Because
I'll just respond to, I think where Zen can be helpful in this is, at least at this temple where we're practicing, the idea is to take care of what needs to be done in every moment. And we're continually dying to the self, right? We have preferences, things that we like to do, things we don't like to do. And we look around and see how we can be of service. So as soon as if we enter into the mind of being of service to others, that's an immediate ego dissolution. So how can, looking around, just simply putting your cushion straight, that's a service to the Zendo. The way that you exit the room, cleaning up after yourself, wiping out, there's a nice sign in the bathroom that says leave no trace. So wipe out the sink. It's courtesy. Our religion is omoyari. Omoyari, Japanese, is consideration for others. So think about what do others need here, and ask. If you don't know, if you're not sure how you can be of service, you can always ask somebody that's wearing a blue rakusu, and they'll tell you what you can do. And there's always something. There's something for everyone. And being of service, I mean, it sounds kind of like, oh, I got to do some work, but it's also very freeing. It can be great, a lot of joy in that as well. So I think that's kind of the function of the Zen Center, is to learn how to be of service, to learn qualities of consideration for others, to think about the needs of others. Even when we're sitting in the Zendo, we think about, we might be aware of the people on either side of us. And everything we do matters. Our thoughts even, so working, just the fact that you come here is a service, really. Just your being, that's the foundational service that you can offer, is just coming here to sit with others, because you support others beyond your doing something. Your presence supports others in the practice. I think there's a room full of people here, and when everybody's sitting together, it makes it hard to get up and leave. So my teacher would say, she would be sitting in the Zendo in Japan and be like, I'm ready to break something here, but the person on my left isn't moving, the person on my right isn't moving, so I'm just going to sit. And that's the support. So you support beyond what you think. And I think that's the dissolution of the ego. As soon as we think, oh, I've got to do something for somebody else, that's ego based. Just being here, right? Just being here and coming is a support for others. But of course, you want to also be of service out in other ways too. I remember when I came back to visit with my family after 3 months of practicing with my teacher. And I came home. My parents always fought. They always argue, and they still do. They just always argue, especially around meal times. I'd come home and they'd be fighting about what was wrong with the meal in some way. And they put all of this effort into making a meal. And my usual response prior to training was, damn it, here they go again. Why don't they shut up? Why do they have to keep arguing like this all the time? And one of the things that I learned being with my teacher, she said, every time you point your finger outwards, you've got to turn it around and point it toward yourself and ask yourself, where am I to blame in this situation? What's my role here? Not in a self-deprecating way, but what's my role here? What can I do to help things? Rather than pointing outwards at other people, say, hey, they're not doing it right. Right? Point back, what can I do? So a miracle happened in the middle of the dinner. My parents, true to form, are arguing with each other, and so a miracle happened. I started thinking, oh, here they go, and then I went like this. Okay, Diane Roshi said, point it back at yourself. What can I do? Oh yeah, in the Zendo, when we finish eating, we wash our dishes. Oh, I said, oh, I can wash the dishes. Believe me, that's not my usual response. Last thing I would want to do is wash the dishes, But I thought, wait a minute, no, I gotta wash the dishes. So I took the dishes, brought them to the sink, brought my parents' dishes to the sink, started washing them. They started arguing. They were still arguing, but their argument started dying down. I was washing the dishes, and my mother called out. She said, "Thank God for dying." So there's so much we can do, right? There's so much we can do and letting go of ego should be a positive thing, right? Opening the door for something, looking out for what do other people need. This is breaking our habits, breaking our habit patterns. What can I do? The simple things. You don't have to save the world. We say beings are numberless. I vow to free them all. Forget that. Just focus on holding the door for somebody, washing your dishes, taking care of cleaning up after yourself can go a really long way. And keep the focus. What's my role here? Let's keep asking that question. I think it can take us a long way. Of course, it's not the end of the story, but it can take us a long way. But I really appreciate everything you guys have been saying. I want to keep it. Maybe we can. I see we're a little bit over time. I don't want to keep people. We can have some informal conversation too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could keep the conversation up if you like. Thank you.
So to close the Dharma talk, call and response.
Before we close, I'd just like to recognize that we do have a number of new people here today. So Benji and his friend Samantha, Holly, thank you for coming. And Kevin and Chloe, and David brought his sister Laura, who was the only person allowed in here with Paul because she's taking pictures for him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
The many beings are numberless, vowing to carry them across.
The many beings are numberless, vowing to carry them across.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, vowing to cut off the mind road.
Dharma gates are countless, vowing to wake to them all.
Dharma gates are countless, vowing to wake to them all.
Buddha's way is all embracing, vowing to follow through.
Buddha's way is all embracing, vowing